Hello and welcome back to the AI Ethics Now podcast. My name is Tom Ritchie and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Helen Hope. Hi, Helen.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you.
I wonder, Helen, if you could give us a little bit more about your role and kind of what brings you to this conversation around AI, please.
Okay, so I've been working at the University of Worcester for 19 years, and during that time, I developed an interest in academic integrity. And so, therefore, I got given a lead role within the university, and that started in 2019. So, looking at developing policy and practice, making academic integrity less punitive, and trying to think about it from a very educational point of view. And really got to the point in 2022 where myself and my colleague thought we'd cracked it. And then suddenly generative AI arrived in November 2022, and we had to start rethinking the whole issue of academic integrity and what generative AI would mean for that. My colleague would say she's not very techy, so she kind of said, Helen, have a look at this, which just led me to really seeing what was the beginnings of AI in education and what that looked like. And through that time, I've led a group within the University of Worcester looking at how we can bring generative AI into lectures, into assessment, into all the different processes within university. So a little like you're doing on this podcast, really. So that's it. Just created a passion for AI of all kinds, and that I research it daily. I relate to staff how it might work, and just try and save everyone time is the main thing for me.
I mean, it sounds really interesting and it's a massive piece of work. I imagine that was not the most welcome early Christmas present in November 2022 when ChatGPT dropped. I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about what you see as the potential benefits of AI in an education context.
Yeah, absolutely. I was teaching for 10 years in secondary schools before I came into higher education. And I think that made, when I came into higher education, I became a much more critical practitioner. I see it from a different space than I do now, but I can also see how, therefore, a lot of my friends are teachers. How can I support them? What are their problems? Where are their issues? How can we make a difference? And I think teachers are expected, in particular in primary and secondary education, they're expected to have so much knowledge and expertise in a wide range of areas within their subject. And yes, they are subject specialists, but also they have to understand how to behaviour manage, which is becoming increasingly difficult, I think, in schools, and how to create different ways of teaching. And I became a teacher because I copied off what my mentor did. I got ideas from there. And teaching is often about recycling ideas that you have seen elsewhere. So I was actually working with some teachers earlier on this week who had never used AI before. So I said, well, let's go for a working example. What's your challenge right now? Something really simple. And they said, well, I want to do some year 3 lessons on Vikings. And I said, okay, so we need to give a bit more detail. So it's year 3 on Vikings. How many lessons do you have? How long are those lessons? So they did that. So I went and I said, right, let's produce a unit of work. And they couldn't believe how quickly the AI had done this. So they said, this must be the paid for version. I said, no, it's not a paid for version. This is a free version that you could access now. And they were like, oh, but is it linked to the national curriculum? So I said, right, let's revise it. Let's make sure it's linked to the national curriculum. Pretty sure that data set is in there. And then I said, but let's think about it in a different way. Let's think about active learning. Could it create some active learning activities for you? Which are the worst things to consider as teachers? How do I make this as interesting as possible? And lo and behold, within about 3 minutes, we created a really detailed unit of work. Now, these were experienced teachers and they thought, wow, like, how do we do this? And then later on, only a couple of days ago, I was talking to some new teachers. They're literally just about to start their teacher training degree. And I'd said on this question box, ask me any questions about generative AI. And they said, well, how could we use it? How is it going to help us? So I then went through the same example with them. And one of the things that they're really struggling with is, imagine how many hours planning time do they have to spend, which is before they even get in the classroom. So if we can reduce that planning time for teachers, which is what really is very hard and very time consuming, can they then be really supporting and developing relationships within the classroom, which will make a difference to all those children? And actually, how can they cater for the neurodiverse child, which is increasingly in schools? How can they make a difference to that child, but at the push of a button, where it gives them some ideas of how to do that? Because it takes so long for children to get through the system and be diagnosed as neurodiverse, when actually these pupils are in the classrooms already and we're struggling to support them. So anything that we can do for teachers in that way, I think will make a difference to pupils. But the other thing I realize about education, and kind of happened during COVID when everyone suddenly moved online, and actually a lot less students have gone back to school. So I think it's about 80% currently that are actually back in school. So what are these other 20% doing? But the thing about school, and I love the work of Ken Robinson here, and there's if you're familiar with his work, as some of your students may or may not be, he really challenged the traditional way in which we educate children. And he talks about how we educate children in groups. So they come through and we educate them according to age. And then in secondary school, we might educate them according to our perceived ability, because they have gone through some tests, and therefore we ability band them. And I was always intrigued by this, even before AI, before anything else. Why do we do that? And why does it have to be this traditional format? And why do we educate children in that way? Are there better ways of doing things? And I think generative AI, to some extent, might really be a disruptor of education and learning, in that there might be better ways to educate an individual child, and there's a much more possibility for individual learning, if only we could get away from this idea that it's about age. Because as we know, age isn't a good factor to determine why someone should be in a classroom with someone else. I'm not sure whether you've got any children, but I've got a July child. So her best friend was born at the beginning of September. There's 9 months different already. And yet we're educating these children in the same way. And child geniuses often don't go to school because schools can't cater for how they do it. So therefore, how can we use AI to really challenge the thinking on education? And I really hope that we can make a change, because if we're still, like Ken Robinson said 10, 12 years ago, we're still educating children in the same way we did in the 1900s. And every school in the whole world, this is what they do. They might have some different methods, but actually, traditionally, they do this. Could generative AI actually challenge that? And I'm really interested to see how that can move forward. But the way I would do it is, by now, I challenge my students thinking about, well, why do we do that? And what is the purpose of that? And does it actually make a difference? And can you then go into schools and can you make a difference by challenging traditional thinking? But the real kind of stumbling block here is government and possibly finance, because governments tend to have a way in which they think. For example, the Conservative government are very much based in a traditional academic model, and therefore this is what they want. They want people to pass exams. So how can we, think about it differently and convince the powers that we should think about it differently and that it will benefit everyone? And I think that's where risk comes into it. And therefore, I'm really interested to see how that might move forward with a new government here, but also, new governments all over the world currently. Can they develop different ways of thinking that are not traditional? Because I'm not sure that traditional works so much in our current world.
Yeah, and I can completely agree with that perspective. I'm an August baby, so I was in class with people who were nearly a year older than me for most of my schooling, and it's one of those things that we kind of accept as being the way things are done. But actually, I think you're right to reflect on this why do we do it this way? Why are we focusing on a system that has been in place for a couple of hundred years? I think one of the real potential things that AI could be useful for is helping to create specific programs and ways of working for different children depending on their needs. And we can't do that yet. We're not there yet with our technology, but that feels like a space that AI would be useful for in education, is almost, for want of a better term, like a study buddy. Someone that you have as your AI friend who you can talk to about work, who doesn't give you the answers but can help you debate, figure things out. You can ask the questions that perhaps you can't ask the teacher in class because there's 29 other people in the room. I think Ken Robinson's perspectives on education are fascinating. They were something that I watched when I very first started getting into teaching myself, to really challenge my own thinking around actually how we educate, how we promote creativity in children, how we destroy creativity in children. But I think that that way of thinking about education is something that AI can do, because it's challenging us to consider what do we value as humans. And you mentioned around speaking to trainee teachers and helping them with schemes of work and with case studies. And I think you're entirely right. If AI can help you write the 5 case studies you need for your lesson in 35 seconds, which we know it can do, that saves you the 3 hours that you would perhaps have to go away and do that, to then focus on pastoral care, or how do we, as you say, support neurodiverse students, or actually how do we as teachers improve our own quality of life in this as well, because it's not about just working more and more.
But I think the real challenge is ourselves and our own inherent beliefs about what is right and wrong. So within higher education, and actually within my group of teacher friends and people that I speak to, there is still a few too much people thinking that using AI is cheating, and that actually it's better to do it a hard way, which I find interesting, because I'm always want to find more efficient ways of doing things. And I never thought the calculator was cheating. Well, it was allowed in an exam. I never thought the internet was cheating. For me, it was a new way to do things. And you've mentioned this earlier, and it's not about replacing who you are, it's about enhancing who you are. So to try and get through to the ones that aren't ready to embrace AI yet, that it can be an enhancement, but we do have to think about using it critically, using it responsibly, using it ethically. We spent a lot of time talking about how we can use it without causing academic integrity issues, and that's definitely a challenge. But the other side, which always amazes me, is if this is a new technology and it's really trendy and everyone's talking about it, why are so few of us still not using it? And I read a study just this morning, which was saying that there's only about 7% of people within the world that actually really know how to use it to help enhance what they do. And I just keep thinking back to that marginal gains and thinking, if only we could all use it, just even a small part, and understand how we can make gains. One thing, you talk about AI and happiness, and there's that they're developing AI to help prevent loneliness. Finding, so chatbots that are talking to people that stop them feeling lonely. And I wonder what a difference that might make to those people who genuinely do feel lonely. Like, the person on their own that just happens to have an Alexa, and they talk to their Alexa and it talks back to them. I think AI Alexa is coming, but you will have to pay for it. That might make people feel less lonely, and therefore less likely to go down a path of self-destruction in some way because of that loneliness. Or teenagers that are really struggling to connect with people. I'm not saying it's a great solution for everyone, but actually one of the things is about starting to learn how to talk, and maybe they don't know how to talk, and that's one of the things that prevents them talking to real people. Can we develop these skills, and therefore can AI genuinely help with happiness? That's a really deep question, I think. But in education, you see, as a secondary school teacher, you see lonely children, you see neurodiverse children, you see the ones that you think wouldn't be lonely but have different issues going on. And I was reading something that says, here's a prompt to help use AI as a life coach. Like, could those little things make a genuine difference for education and for those vulnerable children with education? And that's always an interesting question for me.
And I think as well, yeah, I agree with you, the potentials for it. I think what I've found through this entire process is that we have to try to take a balanced view with these things, because there are inherent benefits of, say, AI for loneliness, but then there are inherent risks. It's very difficult to imagine a system that's different from one that you succeeded in. We work in an academic context, so clearly university has worked for us at one point or another, because we wouldn't still be here. So there's almost an element of like survivorship bias with how we teach and how we approach education. And because it's worked for us, and because it worked without AI, we may struggle to see the role that AI can play. And I think that's something that a lot of colleagues feel, is they go, well, I didn't learn this way, so how could we possibly use this? But I know if I went back 50 years, colleagues would go, well, I didn't use a typewriter. Do you know what I mean? It's the same set of questions that kind of come up over and over again. Do you have any reflections on how we can ensure that AI, in whatever context, is developed and used in a way that benefits all of humanity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in order for it to happen, then we need to convince governments and politicians that to use things in an ethical way. I think that's been really challenging to think about in the UK recently, because what we've seen is quite a lot of possibly unethical behaviour. And therefore, how could governments and individual politicians use this as a source for good? And I know there's lots of think tanks, how can we use this? But I think you just need someone to be in there that understands how generative AI could bring that good to it. I think that's really important. We talk about climate change, and one of my concerns about climate change is, one, when you look at, they have all these big summits, but nothing ever really changes. And AI might really damage the climate in some ways because of the processing power and the water and everything else that could make the environment worse. And I think that's one of the challenges with AI. And I know that the government in America has been meeting to discuss this. And that's a kind of high level change that is required. I don't think there is an answer, because I always find myself frustrated about, why do the people higher up than me not understand the importance of something? In some shape or form, we have to try and make the difference and convince them that AI can be a force for good, and therefore, what can they do? I was speaking to a doctor a few weeks ago who is now working privately. So I had a private appointment. I definitely paid through the nose for it. And we were speaking about the NHS and how maybe what might make a difference within the NHS, because we spend thousands and billions of pounds on it. But how can the government make a difference? Because they keep telling us that the NHS is broken. What I want is to see some solutions. And I think AI might be part of that solution. I was actually speaking to a doctor last night who was saying, we've got this system, but it doesn't talk to this system, outpatient, inpatient. Like, how can it be that we've still got systems that don't talk to each other when we've got all this technology that would make a difference? So
Yeah, and I think there is a really important role that governments will have to play in this. And you've kind of touched on themes of governance as well. And one of the questions that we ask our students a lot is, where should this governance be? We've seen the EU AI bill. Should it be at that kind of supranational level, or do we need to think about it more on a community-based level? It's really interesting to think about, where should the governance for this sit? Do we want to just cede all control to Microsoft and to Google and to other organizations? I would say probably not. We want this to be something that links to the idea of almost like nothing for us without us. So we don't want these things to be developed in a way that we can't then input on them. But I think the challenge comes then of, how do we make sure that all those voices are then part of that process? And it's a real challenge, I think, particularly around the use of AI, because people tend to be nervous with technology and push back against it. I wonder your thoughts on how individuals, as we've spoken about, but also businesses and governments can work together to help shape that future of AI.
I think it's about recognizing when we can work together to solve complex problems. So bringing business leaders together who are in different areas of expertise, whether it be in medicine, for example, or engineering. How can those businesses work together to solve what might be considered a complex problem of climate change or poverty? So I think the more that we can bring businesses together, even on smaller scales, Chamber of Commerce, bringing like-minded people together who really are enthusiastic about embracing new ideas and technologies and thinking in different ways. And I think there are lots of leaders in business that are like that. And I think if we can get people to work together, that will definitely help us solve some of the issues. But it's also developing common goals. You have to have the want and the ability as part of their businesses to really want to make a difference to the world and bring those people together, because I think together they can do that. And you talked about how do we really want the big businesses and big governments to do that? I think in order to change the world, then we need to have the governments listen to the smaller voices. We have to do that. But I realised quite early on in my job role here that if I was going to instigate change, it would need to be led by me, because I wanted the change the most, maybe more than the people higher up. So I've started on working out what I can take action on. So it has been the smaller things, and that eventually gets bigger. So I take action small, and then it goes to the whole university, and then that maybe spreads out. I educate my students, you educate your students. That starts small. It then comes out. So I think even though the technology is developing now, it will be the young people of today that have understood it, because we've created that understanding, that go out there and will be part of the businesses of the future that will start to think about that. So I do think the young people of today have a very different take on climate change, poverty, diversity. I think they embrace inclusivity a lot more than my understanding was when I was a young person, because I think there's so much information out there and they can make their own choices. So I think even though the technology is developing quickly now and the big corporations are in on it, I think the young people coming through will have a very different take than the people running these big corporations now. It might not be a better one, but in some cases it will be. And I think they're probably the ones that will make a difference and will be the business leaders that will think about wanting to make change with society and the climate in a much bigger way than we do now.
Yeah, and I think particularly kind of what you're discussing around this ability to critically engage with AI and not just accept it on face value, and to be able to open the black box that AI can represent from time to time. The explainability of it can be difficult. I think that's something that I'm really keen for my students, and it sounds like you're really keen for your students to be able to do as well, is be able to understand and then be able to communicate it. I wonder, Helen, then, for just to finish up, I wonder your thoughts on what do you think the most important steps that we can take to ensure a positive future with AI are?
Coming from an education background, I think the first thing will always be about education, and educating our students from a very young age, from the primary school age upwards, to understand about the benefits and the negatives of AI and how it can be used to enhance but shouldn't be used to replace. I think if we can do that through education and schooling and through university, then that will make a big difference out there in the world. I think the second thing would always be to think about how you can use AI for good. I always like to think something small can make a big difference. For example, smiling at someone at a bus stop or talking to them. I'm very northern, so it's a very natural thing for me to do. But what small steps can you take as an individual to make a difference to your local community? And think about that in the same way. What difference can you make with AI to make a difference to your local community? So very much coming at AI from an altruistic point of view. And I think the third thing would definitely be to use AI to help solve some more complex problems. So, for example, in my university and in my school, I look at retention, and retention of students is actually a really complex problem. So one of the things that I'll be doing this year is working with a group to see what solutions we can use with the benefit of AI helping us to brainstorm and problem solve. How can we make a difference to those tricky and complex problems? So actions that generally that we can take action over ourselves. I think those would be the three things that I would look at.
Absolutely. And I think it's part of that roadmap we need to consider, I think, for what's next. And everyone I speak to about this has a different perspective, but it's interesting how there are common themes that run along all of them. And I think education ultimately has to be that foundational one. Thank you so much, Helen. Really looking forward to speaking to you again in future. But thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you.